Yo, what's going on, y'all? Welcome to episode 2 of Morning Thoughts, is I guess what we're calling this thing. Now, I'm calling it an episode. I misspoke because, you know what? If this thing doesn't pick up, then we're shutting it down. But you know what? We did it. They said we couldn't do it. They said we weren't going to get here. But last week we had 91 plays on YouTube and on like Spotify and iTunes and stuff, you know? And thankful for all 91 of you that listened, or you know, the one person that listened 91 times, just to really, you know, really hammer it home. Appreciate you, and shout out to the thumbs down guy. That this podcast was like, I don't know, last week's was like 37 minutes long or something, 35 minutes long, and I posted it to YouTube, and literally like 5 or 6 minutes after I posted it, it had a thumbs down on YouTube, which I guess somebody just was not feeling the 5-minute intro or whatever. And, you know, just decided to give it a thumbs down. I guess it could be a girl, you know, like shout out to all the bitter young ladies out there too. But I just imagine some guy that works like in sales at, you know, some auto parts retailer and is just like waiting for YouTube videos to get uploaded so that they can give it a thumbs down. But maybe that's not the case, you know? Maybe it was honest. So I don't know why I'm still talking about this. I promise I'm not bitter about it at all. But I got my coffee and got some new topics ready to talk about last week. The theme of the week, which I'm just saying it's the theme of the week. I don't know if we're actually going to rock with that, but last week, just a couple times, it came up, this idea of like, who tells you to feel about you? Like who is the one that's telling you how to feel about yourself? And that's the theme we're going with. I read this article last week on Instagram about how, or I read it on, I think it was on Forbes. It was about Instagram, how Instagram ranks lowest in terms of social media apps for mental like wellness. It has the most cases of anxiety and depression and bullying and just other general bad stuff. And so honestly, not super shocking, but you know, maybe we'll address a little bit of like mental wellness and mental health on social media and get into a couple other things. It's Monday morning. I got up early. I got humbled this morning in my workout. I just got my ass kicked. But you know what? That's good on a Monday. It puts me in my place, you know, and starts my Monday off right. So ready to get after it. So last week you guys heard me talking about a shoot that I did in Dallas. It was a personal shoot. I said that I had done a test that I'd spent like, I think my Monday morning thought last week was that I had spent $1,000 on a personal test for my portfolio. And a bunch of people were hitting me up like, you spent $1,000 on your portfolio? Like, what was that, like for prints or for what? And what I mean by that when I say test is that it was a personal shoot that I had put together. It was a test for the models, meaning they weren't getting paid. They were trading for images for their portfolio. I was creating images for my portfolio. But basically, I'd spent $1,000 or around there to create this personal work on things like studio rental, hair and makeup artist, wardrobe. I styled and purchased myself, and it wasn't cheap. But I also was trying to bring like a pretty high level production value to the shoot. And here's why my morning thought was about why that was worth it, and why I think that spending money on things like that as a photographer is more worth it than spending money on things like gear. Gear is a sexy thing to spend money on, right? Like it's something tangible, it's something we can hold. We don't really have to do much. Like it doesn't require any effort from us to buy new gear other than just spending money. And so it's a real easy way, an easy step to feel like you've made progress, that your work has gotten better or will get better. And it's like a kind of like a dopamine boost of like, okay, cool, next level, right? I've leveled up. But it's cost us nothing. It's required zero work on our part, other than maybe, you know, the work to save up for gear. But the reason I say that it's really important to spend money on things like personal shoots, and why I think that in the end that will have just exponentially more return on investment than gear, is that, so I spent $1,000 on the shoot, and it's likely that the reason I did the shoot in the first place was that there was a gap in my portfolio. So I ended up shooting 4 curve models or plus size models, and they were amazing. They were so talented and really great. I'm so thankful to have had them. But I didn't have any of that work in my portfolio, and I want my portfolio to be more inclusive and more diverse. And I just needed that work for my portfolio, because potentially if somebody was coming to hire me and saw that I was not inclusive or didn't have that type of work in my portfolio, then potentially they wouldn't hire me. And so while I spent $1,000 on that shoot, it's possible that that work could be the work that makes someone decide to hire me for a $50,000, $100,000 campaign. You never really know. And that $1,000 that I spent, even though that seems like a lot, could potentially just have exponential ROI. So I highly recommend, if you're a new photographer, I know it's not sexy, I know it's not fun to spend money on stuff that you can't necessarily have like a tangible result from. I mean, other than the images for your portfolio, which is exciting. It's not necessarily as fun to spend money on. It's not a thing that you can spend money on that you can like hold and stuff. But I highly recommend it. Hopefully that made sense. I highly recommend you investing in your own growth and your own maturity as an artist and the development of your own portfolio as an artist. If you don't shoot personal work, or if you're not shooting or constantly creating work that is advancing your portfolio as a creator, then you're going to be stagnant, and that will be just super reflective in your portfolio. So I highly recommend that. That was my last weekend, and my thought behind last week's Monday morning thought. It's Monday morning right now, obviously, and I guess I'll post this on Tuesday. I'm trying to, originally I thought I was going to post these on Friday, and so that people, I guess, could listen to them over the weekend. I actually like a podcast on Monday, because I think when I'm sitting down at my desk, I like things to listen to while I'm getting work done, especially if I'm doing kind of mindless retouching work. So I'm shooting for Mondays, but right now, lately, I've been recording these on Monday mornings, so they've been coming out on Tuesday, and maybe I'll stick with that just because it's my podcast and I'll do whatever I want. But if you guys have a different preference or want it on another day, let me know. Feel free to comment. I may or may not take it into consideration, but we'll see. So on Tuesday of last week, I turned 31. And that sounds, I don't know, I can't tell if that sounds young or old. I guess it depends on, it's relative to how old you are. But I realized that I have a lot more younger followers than I thought, a lot more younger people that are looking up to my work, I guess, and listening to my morning thought, which shouldn't really be surprising. The reason I do morning thoughts is because I want people to be I don't know if educated is the right word, but to be informed, and hopefully to help people not make the same mistakes that I've made in the past, or learn from some of the stuff that I've learned, which is how I learned as an artist, whether I was a musician or a photographer or whatever. And so it shouldn't really be surprising to me, I guess, that they're younger. I think in my mind, I feel super young, and I consider myself super young. It's weird how even when I see people on TV, they always look older than I do. Even college football players, or like reality TV people, they always look older than I am, even if they're 6 or 7 years younger. I don't know if that's just a perception thing, but I still feel super young. But I had a couple thoughts around turning 31. When I turned 30, I posted this on Instagram in one of my posts, that there was this sadness when I turned 30 that I couldn't really explain. And looking back on it now, when you're in your teens and your 20s and you have birthdays, you live in this state of sort of eternal youth, right? You're always not exactly as old as you want to be, I think, or at least that's kind of how my mindset has always been. And I always felt like I was going to be young, in my 20s, I guess, is what I consider young. And then when you enter your 30s, there's this mindset shift, or at least there was for me, that okay, I don't have infinite time left. Like and granted, like I know that I'm still super young. I'm not trying to say like I'm an old guy or anything, but like I know that time is my most valuable resource and that it's, it is limited. And I think you start to think about that more when you enter your 30s because you spent your whole life thinking about your 20s, I think, or at least I had. And so there's this bit of sadness, but the cool thing I think about turning 31 is what I realized was you spend your whole 20s trying to figure out who you are. You're trying new things, you're testing your voice, you're trying new hobbies and new career paths and learning different, like if you're in college, you're taking different courses and learning different areas of study. And areas of study, I've never said that before in my life, but you know what I'm saying. And you're just trying to figure it out. And I think when you get in your 30s, you've got a pretty good solidified notion of who you are as a person and what you want to do or what you like, what you dislike. I'm not saying you have to, but I'm just saying like you've had enough time, I think, at that point to have figured it out a little bit. And it feels really good to be in that position. I think that's one of the coolest things about getting older is knowing what you like and don't like and just being okay with that, And I feel like in my 30s, I spent my whole life, but my 20s especially, building the foundation of something. So whether it was in music or, looking back on it now, like I was a touring musician for 8 years. And then I've been a writer since college, studied creative writing in college, rhetoric and writing actually. And, have been a photographer and director for a number of years. And what I've realized now is I've spent my 20s cultivating this foundation of being a professional artist, like being a full-time freelance artist. And that sounds silly, but it's like, that's not necessarily an easy thing to do. And so what's cool about my 30s is that now I can actually take that foundation and build on it. Like that's what your 30s are good for. Like, who you are, what you want to do, now build, create something that is meaningful and lasting out of that foundation. And so honestly, like I'm just super stoked to be 31 and to like know a little bit more about where I am. I certainly don't have all the answers. I certainly don't even know exactly like where I want to end up, whether it's in creative direction or in photography or in whatever it may be. But I feel really, really confident about where I am today and where I am now. So that's my thought on getting older. I think age is relative to how you feel and, do the things that make you feel young. And, I also posted in that post on my birthday, I posted about not necessarily like for the longest time on Instagram, I haven't really known what my voice is. And that's a really interesting topic as well. I think we have our artistic vision and artistic style visually that we post on Instagram, especially if you're a photographer. And that's a really important thing. But I also think like our voice and the way we write captions and share our ideas is also a huge part of what our voice is. And if you've been following me on Instagram for a number of years, you might know that I started on Instagram doing this hashtag captions by writers. I started this community of writers on Instagram to share their work. And then eventually that turned into a project, which was the first ever Instagram novel, where during November of, I think it was 2014, maybe, so November is National Novel Writing Month, NaNoWriMo for short. I tried it before, failed miserably. And so in 2014, I decided, okay, I'm going to write like an Instagram novel, like a photo novel. So every day for 30 days during the month of November, I wrote one chapter a day, like just off the cuff, like I hadn't planned anything, but I had shot images that were a sequence in a story and combined the images with the writing. And that project got featured on Instagram. And the interesting thing about that feature was, by the time it got featured, it was like a year later. It was like December of 2015. And at that point, I had been doing captions by writers and like creative writing posts for like, I don't know, 2 or 3 years at that point. And honestly, I was like actually pursuing commercial photography full time. And so I wanted to post less like Instagram-y type photos that were more abstract that I could write to. and post more of my commercial work, which was a lot of, which was a lot of like commercial fashion and became commercial fitness work and portrait work. And so it became a little bit harder to write to. And so since then, honestly, like I've had this sort of creative, I don't want to say confusion, but a little bit of not knowing what direction I should take my voice in, or at least the writing portion of Instagram in. And of course, like I'm way overthinking this. Like you don't really have to think this way at all. But you know, I part of me just gets so tired of like this sort of corny, you know, Drake lyrics, or obviously that's like the cliche example, but you know, like the real short, like phrase on Instagram where you post a photo and it's like, push it to the limit, or that would be a terrible one, but you know, just like those little cheesy like phrases or whatever. I just think that there's more of an opportunity on Instagram if you have somebody's attention to actually say something of value. And so like I've kind of been trying to share, kind of like I do on Morning Thoughts, a little more honest like insight, but that doesn't necessarily always perform super well or be received super well or is received super well. But, you know, I think that that's kind of where I'm at right now, is like I want to provide insight to people and to younger creators and artists and be honest, because I feel like there's so much just kind of corny, fake bullshit on Instagram. And I think that's why we're seeing people feeling depressed and anxious when they look at it, that I would rather be a voice of like authenticity and a voice of honesty, hopefully on the platform, even if it doesn't particularly do super well, or, you know, people don't read it all or whatever it may be. And so where I am right now, I'm honestly just kind of cool with that. And that's just what I'm rocking with. So we'll see how that goes. But I'm just going to keep going in that direction, and it'll work or it won't. So that's where I'm at. I think on Wednesday, I posted something about Jake and Logan Paul I realized that they're basically like Johnny Knoxville and Jackass was when I was a kid. Like they're these like total idiots. They're doing stupid shit on television, aka these days YouTube, you know, that all the young kids think is awesome and whatever. I think a few people messaged me in response to this, and you know, a lot of people agreed or thought it was funny or whatever, but some people were like, I think that the Pauls are like worse people, and I'm not in any sort of position to judge or say whether they are or not, although I absolutely see that as valid. But I also think that it's just like, we're not viewing it from the lens of, you know, an 8 or 10-year-old or whatever, you know, like we were like I was when I was a kid and Jackass was on TV. By the way, funny side note. So when I was, you know, that was like the cool thing when I was a kid, right? And all my friends were skaters. Like skate culture was huge. Blink-182, skate culture, that whole thing, like punk rock, that was big when I was a kid. And I was always like the tall, lanky kid and in my crew. And I could never land an ollie. And the ollie is like the essential foundation of every single skateboarding trick. And I couldn't do one. And so I was basically like in my crew, I ended up just being the kid with the camera that filmed all the stunts, because I had a friend that would just do all the dumb shit that Johnny Knoxville did. Like we were just idiots, but he would, you know, go like jump into bushes and like prank people, like knock on their door and all that stuff. And I was always the kid with the camera because I couldn't do any of like the skate tricks. And I think I also like subconsciously knew at the time that like, I don't really want to be that kid that's like the idiot making an ass of themselves. And, you know, I don't know if I was that self-aware at the time, but luckily that was my role. And I could never land an ollie, which still a little bitter about to this day, because I don't know, ollies, you know, that would be cool. That'd be a cool like party trick. All the skaters out there, any skaters are listening, are just like, you're an idiot. But, oh yeah, so that was my initial thought. But then after that, I posted, I said basically like, the world doesn't need any more like bathtub full of milk and flowers photo shoots. Like we've seen enough, like no more. And I honestly, it was a joke, but it was 100% serious because I'm part of this Facebook group of mostly like amateur local photographers and kind of prosumers and hobbyists. And literally, I kid you not, once a week, if not more than once a week, for the past 3 years, I've seen people post this photo of, some girl or guy in a bathtub full of like this sort of white viscous milky material with like flowers. And I'm just so over it. It's so cliche and it's so overdone. And somebody messaged me like, yeah, but it was a photographer that I actually really respect and admire his work. And he was like, yeah, but where do you draw the line? Like, who's to say that's cliche and all these other images, like all these other fitness images, are not cliche? And I totally agreed with him that there are so many cliche images, and I'm not saying I'm above cliche images, because a lot of times in advertising or whatever, you have to show performance, and a lot of those images end up looking the same. However, I'll make a couple points. First, this is like an art concept that no one's hiring you to shoot. People are just regurgitating this same concept over and over and over again without elevating it or elaborating on it or whatever. It's just like one of those things that you cross off the box when you're a young photographer and you haven't really like thought through a concept. You've just seen something and you're like, oh, let me recycle that. And we all do that when we're young creators. A lot of my work when I first started was recycled. It's still today recycled. I think we all recycle things creatively, hopefully, by taking bits and pieces of different ideas and elevating them. I mean, there's no like new original work necessarily. And so like, I'm not knocking that sort of recycling, creative recycling. However, when you take something and literally just copy it is when I have more of an issue with that. And I think that's my first point, is that I'm not trying to discourage anyone from doing work. I'm actually trying to elevate, hopefully, people from doing work that they want to do. And by like pushing them, I hope to think about concepts further and take it one step further or 2 steps further. And hopefully that comes through. And then the second point is, it was a joke. I'm not 100% serious about everything that I say on Morning Thoughts. Sometimes most of the time they're serious and they're what I'm actually thinking and what I believe. And then sometimes they're what I believe, but they're also just meant to be a joke. So, take it with a grain of salt. And I think that's on Thursday. I posted something to the effect of like, or no, it was on Friday. I said, like, be careful who you take advice from. You should audit who you take advice from, whether that's like enlightened Instagram models or YouTube CEOs or Kanye West or whoever it may be. Like, don't, like, just because these people have followings, I feel like, and maybe I'm a total hypocrite, but I feel like on social, anyone that gets a platform thinks that all of a sudden they're a motivational speaker or they're some like guru that gets to speak on, things that they have no business speaking on. And I'm sure that I fall into that category a lot, or into that trap, I think, a lot. But at the same time, I try to stick to the things that I think I know about, which a lot of the times is my 10 to 15 years of being a professional artist and being a professional creator and what that looks like. And then, when I get outside of it and start talking about, I don't know, whatever it is, politics, sneakers, whatever, like, probably don't have the best opinion on that. Although I do have an opinion on those things. So, I think it's just really important to audit whoever it is you're getting advice from. Somebody replied to that Morning Thought with this quote that I thought was really good. And it was, I'm trying to remember who it was from, Carl Jung. And the quote was, be something to the effect of like, be wary of all the wisdom you do not earn. And I think that's like basically the wisdom that doesn't come from experience, you're getting secondhand. So like, be cautious of it because it may or may not be true for you. And I think that was a really cool quote. Shout out to Matt McCloskey for sharing that with me. I'd never heard that before. So that's that. Let's see how we're doing on time. All right, 26 minutes in. We are going to, I say we like I'm some radio DJ and I've got a whole team of people here. I'm going to take questions from my Instagram post. By the way, shout out to everyone that asked me questions. This podcast wouldn't exist without you guys doing that. So you guys are the real ones. All right, so the first question I got was strategies for going full time. Now, before I even answer this question, I get this question all the time, but before I even answer this question, I want to pose a different question to you. And the question is like, I want you to ask yourself honestly, do you really want to be full-time? And I'm not saying like, do you want to be like in your ideal world? Is that what you want? Because it obviously is. I'm saying like, take a good hard look at the reality of being a full-time freelance photographer or a full-time freelance writer or artist or whatever it may be, and actually like get to know what that life is like. I think people, who have 9-to-5s that they don't like, but shoot photography on the weekends think that, oh man, it'd be so fun to be a full-time photographer because I love when I get to shoot photography. But they don't actually think about, okay, what does it mean to be a full-time photographer or a freelancer? And let me just give you like a little bit of glimpse of the reality of that. So like when you have a 9-to-5, like you have job security for the most part, you have steady income, you have, somebody telling you for the most part what to do and how to do it. And I know that's probably what you don't want, which is why you want to be a freelance photographer. But when you are a freelance photographer, you wake up every day and you're your own boss. So you set your own schedule. You basically are motivated to work or you're not. And the problem with that is there are certain personality types. I believe this 100%. There are certain personality types that are not meant to be freelance photographers. They don't have the discipline and don't have the motivation to treat a freelance artistic career as a full-time job. Like I wake up early, I get to my desk early and I work as hard as I can and I work all day. And, there are days where some are slower than others, but for the most part, I'm either sitting at my desk, either working on marketing or editing or whatever it is, or I'm out shooting and trying to create new work that I can then edit and market. I think that there are certain personality types that aren't cut out for that aren't suited for that. And I think you have to take a good hard look at, are you willing to go through seasons of super busy, like stressful work where a bunch of jobs come in at once? And more likely, are you willing to go through super dry down seasons where no one's hitting up your phone, no one's sending you an email, no one's hiring you for work, and you have to make ends meet, pay the bills, and also create on top of that stress? And I think it's just a really eye-opening thing when people jump into that and haven't experienced that before. So that's my 2 cents before I even give you advice on how to go full-time. And my first piece of advice that goes hand in hand with that is find a part-time. So I know you've just gotten out of your full-time, but I also think that if you can have a part-time when you're first starting out, of not like a part-time job doing something else. I mean, maybe you can do that too, but if you can find a part-time doing photography that will give you a steady income of a few $100 a month, that'll go a long way. Even if it's stuff that you don't want to do, it'll likely be stuff that you don't want to do, whether it's shooting for social or shooting product photography for websites or e-com or whatever that may be. Like that's or headshots. Like that's probably what you're going to end up doing part-time to pay the bills when you first start out. And like, I respect that. And I think that's a really good idea, to be honest with you, because it just alleviates the pressure of always having to pay the bills via, the creative work that you want to do. So I think doing that part-time and then allowing yourself time on the weekends or during the week that you're not doing that to create the work that you want to create is really helpful. And that's my second tip is like, it's just going to take a lot of building your portfolio in order to go full-time as a photographer, because it just means that you have to hone your voice to such a specific place that people immediately know who you are, what you do, what your style is, what you shoot, and are willing to hire you for that. And generally that means that your portfolio is so not diverse in terms of genre, but I think like deep or yeah, I guess like deep is probably more important than wide, in terms of your genre, that they can see you can shoot in all different types of environments and shoot your thing no matter what the subject is or whatever it is. So I would just say, keep shooting, keep building your work, and that's how you're going to get hired. Finally, spend a lot of your money and time on marketing and networking. That's how you're going to get gigs. Like, people hire who they know. That's just the honest truth of it. So the more people you can have a personal relationship, whether that's in portfolio reviews or face-to-face meetings or coffees or emails, or like even emails is better than nothing, the better. And so, try to network, also try to get in certain advertising places like resource databases, whether that's like database books that go out like Workbook or AdEdge or Found or whatever it may be, or on databases like Workbooks Online or Wonderful Machine or whatever it may be. Put yourself in places where people can find you and can find your work. And it's expensive, but it's something that as a full-time professional photographer, you need to be spending money on. And then, yeah, finally, just be patient. That's like that's the ultimate thing about transitioning from part-time to full-time, is like, maybe you're ready for it and maybe you're not. And if you're not, just be patient that you will get there when the time is right. I guarantee you, when your work is so good and you're so good that people are talking about it and seeing it, that you'll get hired. People will be coming to you, like begging you to work for them. They'll hire you to work for them. That's what I was trying to say. And when that happens, like, you'll know that it's the right time. You'll know that like you won't need another job because you'll be busy. And even the biggest photographers have some of those down moments. But I think the better your work becomes, the more it'll be obvious it's time to switch to full-time. So that was a long-winded way of answering that question, but hopefully that was helpful. Next question. Kim asked, thoughts on metric-free social media? It's funny that this idea, I think, has been popular in the past week or two, just because Kanye mentioned it. And, I posted this article last week about how Instagram has like the most adverse effect on our mental wellness in terms of depression and anxiety and bullying and all that stuff. And there is this idea that a metric-free social media will help that. And I think a little bit, I think that'll help maybe a little bit. I think that it gets rid of the sort of social positioning of follower counts. But at the end of the day, like, I feel the most anxiety just by seeing other people doing, whether it's doing cool stuff or it's working for clients that I want to work for or whatever. And that doesn't necessarily get solved by metric-free social media. I also think that potentially, like, I could see there being a social media that doesn't have external metrics. Like, you don't see how many followers somebody else has, but you can see how many followers you have, because and how many likes you get, but other people can't necessarily see how many likes you get. I mean, I think that would totally upend and screw the whole influencer community, which maybe should happen. But I think that businesses need to know those metrics for their own benefit. And I think it helps us as artists know, is my work resonating? What type of work is doing better than others? What type of work do people respond to more than others? And that's super helpful as a creator and as an artist. I think you should be creating the stuff that you want to create regardless of what other people think. But at the same time, it's helpful to know commercially, like, what are people responding to? And so I could see a social media where, or platform where people aren't seeing those numbers except for you. And maybe that helps. And honestly, maybe that would make the influencer bubble a little more honest, because like you would be in charge of sharing those numbers with the company instead of just like the inflated numbers being shown externally. So I don't know. That's a great question, Kim. And I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on it. So feel free to comment on this YouTube video or send me a DM or tweet at me, Philip Edsel. And let's have that conversation because I'm interested to hear someone else's thoughts. Nash asked, how does an artist stay creative through times of creative drought or block? That's a great question. I think that everything is cyclical for the artist. Like I think that we always go through times of like lots of inspiration and creation. And then I think on the tail end of that, we're kind of, especially if we've been pushing ourselves, we're super exhausted and we're super just uninspired a lot of times. And we go through this sort of like creative block where nothing is really motivating us to create and nothing is really like inspiring us. And I think honestly, that happens 99% of the time because we continue to look within our comfort zone of our art to create. And what I mean by that is like, if you create the same type of thing over and over again, the same type of shoot, the same type of lighting, the same type of environment or whatever it is, like that's going to get super boring to you. And you're going to see more images from that. And you're going to think like, oh, I need to create more. And you're not going to want to do that. And so honestly, every time I've gotten out of creative block is when I've gotten outside of my comfort zone. So thinking about a shooting style that I've never done before or a shooting technique that I've never done before, generally it's something that really like intimidates me. But when I do it, and even though like I'm nervous or anxious about it or whatever, when I do it, there is that immediate excitement and rush of creation, like that sort of like creator joy that you feel when you create something new and you're like experimenting. And that always pulls me out of a creative block. And I highly recommend that you use that as a method to like regain your excitement when you've kind of plateaued on your style or your ability or whatever it is. Like try to get outside of that. And that's how artists like mature. Like that's how you get better as an artist is you keep trying new things and you keep leveling up and like growing. And that should be the natural sort of incline of the artist. And I think as soon as you hit that plateau, then you're not growing anymore and your art feels stagnant because of that. Jorge, free work versus paid work. I have, not surprisingly, opinions on this as well. So I think do any work that you think you can leverage. So, well, within like the scope of what you want to do. But like, let's say somebody comes to you and, you know, like for me, a dream of mine is to shoot ESPN's Body Issue. Like I love the sort of conceptual nature of it. I love the graphic nature of it. It's right up my alley in terms of what I shoot, in terms of like motion and fitness and all that sort of thing. And I would love to shoot that. I would shoot that for free, even though it would take a lot of my time and a lot of my effort and energy and probably cost me a lot of money, but I would do it. Not that they would ever ask me to do that for free. But ESPN, if you're listening, I'll do it for free. And so that's a case where I know that I would work for free and it would be worth it to work for free. Now, I think that there are also clients that come to you. For example, before I really got into fitness work, there was a client that came to me. She had a new company. It was like a Lululemon type brand and didn't have a big budget, but wanted some really beautiful images. And I like wanted to get into fitness work at the time. And I said, okay, cool. Like I will do this shoot for X amount of dollars. It was like almost nothing, but I want to have creative control over the whole thing. So I can create something from my portfolio that could potentially get me hired for a much bigger gig. Again, this goes back to investing in your portfolio. And she was like totally cool with that, gave me total freedom and creative, like total control. And I created something that I like love and that still have in my portfolio. This was a couple years ago. And it allowed me to work for bigger clients just because I had that work in my portfolio. So I think that if somebody's coming to you and you think that you can leverage that opportunity, then it might be worth it to do free work. However, when somebody comes to you and wants you to do work that you may not do for your portfolio, you're not particularly excited about, then by all means charge your fee. And especially like, even if that's a high fee, like, especially if you don't want to do it. Like I a lot of times, if I don't want to do a job, but the client has a budget, I will raise my fee to kind of account for the fact that I can't really use this for anything. And I could probably spend that time doing things that I would rather do, or shoot things I would rather shoot. But if you're going to pay me for my time, then I'm going to make it worthwhile for me. And that sounds selfish, but as a creator, like, your time is, you're being hired for your talent and for your time, and those things have value. And that's almost where you should charge more. So like, it's funny because I could literally, for one client, shoot at like a super high day rate, and then at the same time shoot for another client for free, and like justify doing both because of the work that I'm creating and the ability I will have to leverage that work. Also, don't, this should go without saying, but don't ever do anything for exposure. I guarantee you will never get the amount of exposure that it's worth for the work that you'll put into it, unless you think you can leverage those photos, like I said, but rarely does that ever happen. So, last question. I'll take one more question here. I think we're like 40 minutes in or something. Steven said, promos, all caps, exclamation point. Steven, that's not a question. That's just you yelling at my eyeballs, but I will answer that nonetheless. I'm assuming when you said promos, what you're asking is, tell me about promos. What do you do for promos? So as photographers, we need to get our work out there and advertise. And that's generally in the form, I mean, there are different ways of marketing, but it's generally in the form of e-promos and print promos. E-promos are emails. I do a monthly newsletter that goes out with new work that I've created over the past month. Also a couple things that I've been into that have nothing to do with photography, like albums I've been listening to, or shows I've been watching, or apps I've been using, or whatever it may be. Just because I think it's important to like give a glimpse of who you are as a person. And then for print promos, I do those. Well, a lot of photographers do those once a year. I try to do it once a year. I actually try to shoot for 2 times a year. This year, I think last year I did a magazine and then like 1 or 2 flyers. And then this year I've done, I think maybe a flyer, but I've been slacking on it this year. I definitely need to send another one soon. But that's how I kind of think about promos, print and digital. And, you know, it's one of those things that like, you're going to spend a lot of time on it. You're going to spend a lot of money on it if it's a print promo. And that stuff could immediately end up in the trash. You know, you never know. But it also could come across somebody's desk at the right time when they have a job for somebody just like you. And, you know, it could be fortuitous in that way. And that's kind of the idea behind marketing, is just like trying to get your name in front of somebody so often that they remember who you are and your name when the opportunity arises. So let me see what time we got here. Nice, 45 minutes. Y'all, we did it again. I swear though, if we get, so last week we got 91 plays. This week, if we get 90 plays, I'm burning it to the ground. It's going in the trash. You'll never hear of it again. So tell your friends, and all we gotta do is get 92 plays, and I'll come back the next week. And if you think like, well, that's harsh, well, maybe you should have shared it with your friends. So please, would love for you guys to share. Would love for you guys to, if you're on YouTube, subscribe to the channel, comment, share, smash the like or whatever YouTubers say. If you're on the podcast, then subscribe to the podcast. It's going to be on iTunes and Spotify, but you already know that because you're listening to it on some platform. And yeah, have a great day. Cheers, y'all.